Hello, we are back and right on time like a Swiss watch. We are going to talk about the Nordics now. Today, we have a different moderator than we're used to. Morten is not here today, so we have Maria McDonald, a partner at Nordic Gambling, who I would like to invite on screen to present the panelists. Maria, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, and we can see you too. And
perfect.
All right,
We're all set.
I'll leave you to it.
Thank you. Well, as Sultan kindly said, we're here today to have a discussion and a panel about and bring you up to date with the Nordic region and the latest developments here. As Sultan also said, I'm a partner at the legal firm Nordic Gambling, and I'm your moderator today. I hope you don't have to hear my voice too much. I'm sure our excellent panel will provide some insights and food for thought. I will actually leave for them to introduce themselves. Charmaine, I don't know, would you like to do the honor to start?
Thank you very much, Maria. Thank you, Zoltan, for having me here. Yes, I'm Charmaine. I'm head of regulatory affairs at Playtech. Playtech, for those who might not know it, is a global supplier to the industry, online and land-based. Thank you.
Great. Jari, can we hear from you?
Yes, hello. I'm Jari Vähänen from Finland. I used to work many years in Finnish national monopoly operator Veikkaus, and resigned from there 2 years ago and established my own gambling consultant company called the Finnish Gambling Consultants. So I have mainly worked in lottery world, but now also with some other operators and suppliers.
You've joined the right side. Gustaf.
Hi, Maria, and hi, Charmaine and Jari. It's an honor to participate among so brilliant minds. My name is Gustaf Hoffstedt, and I am the Secretary General of the Swedish Trade Association for Online Gambling. We represent approximately 20 members, among them Charmaine's Playtech.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Yes, it's an excellent panel, so I hope we'll have good discussions on what's going on. Gustaf, I was going to ask you, or start by asking you, because you have been away for a little while.
Yeah, right. I was away some 3-4 months on parental leave, and it feels great to be back. I mean, if the gambling market sometimes can be somewhat chaotic and unstable, it's nothing compared to being with a 1-year-old daughter. So it's great being back.
Welcome back. It's great to see you again. I wanted to ask you, so what has happened in those 3-4 months that you have been away? Can you summarize? Because it's a perfect period of time to sort of, all right, this is where we were at when you left, and this is where we are at now.
Right. Well, almost nothing happened when I was away. And it's true, Maria, but it doesn't have a correlation, obviously, to me. I'm not an important person, but so out of clear coincidence, not much happened apart from one thing, and that was the withdrawal of the temporary COVID-19 restrictions. Mm-hmm. They were taken away in November. But on the other hand, many things happened when I came back to work in January. Namely that, well, to begin with, the government started with proposing new temporary COVID-19 restrictions, despite the fact that they simultaneously had ideas or planned to withdraw all the general restrictions in Sweden. And finally, they came to the only sensible conclusion, namely that they should withdraw the gambling restrictions regarded to the COVID situation as well. More importantly, because this will have not just a temporary but a permanent impact on the Swedish gambling market, the Swedish government a few weeks ago presented their general changes for the Swedish Gambling Act, and I hope that you can allow me a few minutes to talk about those changes during this panel debate.
Of course, definitely. No, I think we will cover that because that is a very interesting development in the Swedish market for sure. And to be honest, I think it's the most important change in the Nordic markets as well. So let's come back to that. Charmaine, you obviously work with a lot of markets and you work with a global operator, but I'm very interested to hear what's top of your agenda now in the Nordics.
I was smiling when Gustaf was talking, when he said like, nothing but, because it's the nature of our job. There's so much that goes on until you actually see a tangible development. It's what we do, but then not always having something immediately to show for it, but it's preparation of. And I think key to that is the real early engagement when you know that something might be coming up. Plenty has kept me busy globally, new markets opening up in Europe. In most markets, there's always something that crops up and you're trying to get a sensible discussion going, ultimately for the long-term sustainability of that market. And that's where Sweden comes in. I mean, we've been discussing, cooperating, submitting responses to the Swedish inquiry for quite a while now. There's many items that have been on the table, that are on the table, and that will be on the table. So that's definitely kept us and will keep us quite busy. Of course, there's been ongoing discussions in Finland in the last number of months. There's always some bits and pieces in Denmark that have been ongoing. So you keep a watchful eye, you're constantly in engagement. But Sweden, I think, as you rightly said, is the one where there's a lot up for debate, and where I dare say we want to make sure that any changes or any new requirements or provisions that come in make sense and work for the wider industry. So that is what will keep us going. I mean, we're a supplier, as you rightly said, and we're a supplier to the industry. I can go along and say ultimately we're a large supplier, we're global, we're used to very large different complexities across markets. We will enter the market, we will meet those requirements, but whether that eventually will work in the long run, or whether you're investing in a market and then there's leakage offshore, if you like, that's what you want to avoid. So if I look at Sweden from sort of an industry point of view, we want to contribute from now, if we know that they're talking about, for instance, introducing software supplier licensing, then we want to be able to, and we hope we'll have the opportunity to engage with policymakers, with those holding the pen, as early as possible, to explain who we are, what we are as suppliers, as software suppliers, and the whole plethora of us. So that, I think, is going to be interesting.
It's always interesting and a challenge, right?
Definitely.
Jari, same question to you. What's high on the agenda in the Finnish market, or if you have any insights in the other Nordic region?
Mainly here in Finland, the new Lottery Act, so new gambling law, we got it 1.5 months ago. So finally big change, or might be big change, because it's not clear what will really happen here and how long current situation will stay. But anyhow, a new law has already changed, I would say, surprisingly a lot. So we have noticed that some operators have already quit from Finnish market, and that has been a big surprise to me, at least, because I don't see any reason why someone should do that. But anyhow, that has happened. Even more operators have stopped their social media marketing, or changed at least language from Finnish to English.
For those who are not so familiar with it, what are the main changes in the new Lottery Act?
In big picture, really nothing. So Veikkaus will continue as a monopoly operator, but they will face more restrictions, so mandatory based loss limits, many other things. So actually, from a monopoly operator point of view, the new law is not so good one because they are not allowed to develop almost anything. They got the permission for international B2B operations. So now they have established and officially already started a subsidiary company. So the basic idea is that company will sell games, probably some technology, but it won't affect nothing here in Finland. Then from offshore operators' point of view, there will be payment blocking to one direction. So payments from Finland to offshore operators will be blocked if the operator will be in blacklist and our regulator, the Finnish National Police Board, will keep that kind of list. But that system will be valid at the earliest next year. So what it will really mean, I'm not sure. But anyhow, payment blocking won't be there when it's about money coming back from operators to Finland, because it's legal for Finnish customers to use services of offshore operators. And according to constitutional law, Finland wasn't allowed to have a payment blocking, because me as a customer, if I have managed to make a bet to other company, then I will have legal rights to get my wins back to Finland. So it will be a really strange system if it will be valid, because I'm not, that's my own opinion, but I'm not sure if we will ever see really payment blocking here in Finland.
But so for other companies, then say the monopoly and well, to some extent, the Finnish customers, there's not much difference in the Lotteries Act. Is that what you're saying for the online operators and for the B2B operators?
Yeah, I would say that those operators who have been here in Finland, who have already Finnish customers, no big change. If, of course, they should be a little more careful when we are talking about marketing and sales actions. But we haven't had any mass media marketing here in Finland, so no single ads. Of course, Eurosport, some TV channels broadcasted outside Finnish borders, they have had some gambling ads, but almost nothing. So no big change. That kind of operators like whatever, Unibet or Paf or Betsson. But the newcomers, it's really difficult to enter in Finnish market now, because police board will have more resources to control also social media. They are looking for new tools to do that. So newcomers, it might be difficult. But one challenge is that there is no precise definition what is illegal marketing, what those operators are allowed to do. So if I'm the customer of whatever offshore operator, can they still send me emails, SMS, what they can do? That's not clear, because there is no definition of that in new law.
I understand. Interesting. Well, we all hope that Finland and Norway one day will maybe open up for a more liberal market, but the time is not yet.
Yes, not yet, but of course we could discuss about that a little bit later here if you want, because there are strong rumors, at least, what might happen here in Finland.
Interesting. Yeah, let's come back to that. Because we heard a little bit about the updates to the Finnish Lotteries Act. Now, Gustaf, may I open the floor for you then to talk a little bit about the new regulations or the changes to the Gambling Act, which the government is proposing here in Sweden? What are the main points of it?
Well, the most important topic is what Charmaine mentioned previously, namely that the Swedish government suggests that Sweden implements B2B licenses to take effect from 1st of July 2023. So we have some time to prepare for those licenses. Although for me, being a lobbyist, there's never enough time to when you want to have an impact on such development. The scope of the B2B licenses is, and I believe that Charmaine told us about that as well. It's a scope of software. If you produces, provides, install, or change a gambling software, then it's mandatory to have a B2B license from the summer of 2023. Whereas, for example, payment providers and other businesses close to our industry, as it seems, they don't have to apply for such license. The reason being to implement these licenses are that we are struggling in Sweden regarding the channeling into the licensing system. And by some, this is B2B licenses is viewed upon as the golden egg, the thing that the measure that will solve the Swedish issue with the low channelization. I don't agree. But having that said, I do believe that a B2B licensing system, if it's correctly developed, it could probably be beneficial, and it could probably contribute at least to a somewhat increased channelization in Sweden. However, we talk a lot about B2B licenses, but that is not the only content of this coming legislation in Sweden. Actually, what is almost as important is what is absent in the governmental bill, because there have been numerous suggestions, particularly targeting marketing, that we have been strongly against over the last 2 years or so. And if you allow me some bragging, Maria, I am super...
I do, because when I saw the proposal, I thought of you and thought that, wow, Gustaf and his organization must have done a really good job here.
It's not, of course, only a product of our efforts, but I do think it is a reason why we get together in an association. That is something, by the way, for Jari and our friends in Finland to think about, because we have been focusing particularly on 3 aspects on the gambling bill, namely that we suggested a withdrawal of a marketing ban between 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. in the evening, for example, in TV and radio and social media. And we advocated for a withdrawal of marketing going from having to be moderate to particularly moderate. And there were also a few other aspects that we engaged in. And to my well, it was extremely satisfactory to read the suggested bill and look for those quite stupid suggestions, and to find at the end when I read the last page of the bill that they were absent. So this is really, really pleasing that it's actually half of the importance of the bill is the absence of stupid suggestions, and the other importance of the bill is obvious what's actually within the bill.
I'm really keen to talk more about the B2B licensing system, because that is a major change and it is important. But first, what are the changes to the marketing regulations now that are actually suggested?
Almost nothing. That's the beauty of everything. There was, I think I mentioned two 2 suggestions that are withdrawn. A third suggestion that is withdrawn is that marketing all gambling products shall be evaluated in a risk classification system. That's not a particularly clever suggestion for many reasons. And that suggestion that has been embraced by the government to this moment is also absent in the suggested bill. So almost all parts or elements of that has a connection to marketing is actually absent. There is one exception from that, and that is that, and this is really difficult. I'm not a lawyer, you are, and I actually believe it's difficult for a lawyer as well, because it's so unclear developed in the legislation.
Of course, it always is.
Yeah, right. That's why we hire people like you.
Exactly. No.
But anyway, the government is not included a risk classification system, but nevertheless, they advocate for that the Swedish Gambling Authority, as well as Swedish courts, shall nevertheless evaluate how risky games are when they evaluate whether their marketing is moderate or not. So the consequence is that an ad for a gambling product may be interpreted or viewed upon differently regarding whether the gambling product is, for example, online casino, something that is regarded as high risk, compared to an NGO lottery selling a few scratch cards. And I'm not particularly enthusiastic about this suggestion for a number of reasons. One is the unclarity of everything, and that the governmental bill, it hands over the interpretation to Swedish courts and to the Swedish Gambling Authority to take a decision at a later stage. And we know what that means. We've seen it after the re-regulation in Sweden. It means that all the operators, they will ask for guidelines, and they will probably not receive sufficient guidelines, and then they will continue with their advertisement. And afterwards, the SGA and Swedish courts will send invoices whenever they find there is an infringement. And you know, Maria, the amount of those invoices. I think in the worst case, it was 100 million Swedish krona, approximately 10 million euro. So that's a lot of money.
It's a substantial amount, for sure. Yes. I think, even as a lawyer, I do agree with you. It's very unclear, and it is unfortunate for operators that the uncertainty in the market in Sweden will continue in another shape. But it will be for sure more a development within marketing and how you can market yourself in Sweden.
Yes, but if I may add, Maria, we shall certainly not be pleased about that particular aspect of the legislation. However, things could have been much, much worse.
Yes.
So it actually looks quite good. And you asked me what kind of changes there are when it comes to marketing. And I spoke to a representative of one of the leading media houses the other day. He had also read the governmental bill, and he said that, well, there is nothing. There's absolutely nothing. So they were really, really pleased as well. And I guess this also calls for restraint within the industry. When the government and finally the parliament shows us that they kind of put the trust towards the industry, we cannot reply by being not moderate in our marketing or with a volume as high as it was in the beginning of the Swedish new regulation. We must prove that we understand the elements of legislation and moderate marketing, because if we don't, we can be certain that the government will come back with perhaps even harsher legislation at a later stage. So this is a beautiful moment for us to show that we are the adults in the gambling market.
Sounds good. Now, let's move back to what you initially started to talk about, Gustaf, the B2B or supplier license. Charmaine, what is your take on the Swedish developments here? Is this something you embrace and you think is a good idea, or are you more conservative and wonder how this is actually going to pan out?
There's so many facets to it. I think in blunt terms, sort of the immediate question when there's a policy intervention, if you like, you say why. In more proper jargon, like what's the justification for it? What is the determined need for that? And then how are you going to respond to that need? And you have, of course, EU law that comes into play in there, and we must not forget that should guide us. I think in Sweden, Gustaf has mentioned some of them. The government, if you like, felt that there was a need to intervene on various fronts for their own decided reasons. I think channelization rates have been cited. If indeed, in comparison to when the market opened, there has been a decrease in that channelization, or there has been a leakage, if you like, to back to the offshore, rather than within licensees, then there's something that is not functioning on the market. And then you have to see why. And the authorities believe that the B2B licensing is one way of addressing that. It's one way. It's not, as we've said, the only way. It will be one part of. But why do you introduce a B2B licensing system? Usually it's because you want to disrupt, if you like, the supply chain. And game providers are only one part of that whole supply chain. So, we can discuss whether or not that will be efficient in the long run. It will be a step towards. And then you come towards the second step, where you're talking about, okay, let's say they're talking about software suppliers. There are just so many types of software suppliers, large and small, like nano developers, if you like, to large ones like ourselves. And if in Sweden at the moment you've had a good supply, quite a comfortable supply to the industry, I suppose the policymakers would not want to, or should not want to, introduce something that would in any way reduce that content, that supply, because at the end of the day, why are you doing it? You're doing all of this to keep your players on shore, or to bring more of those players back on shore. But if by doing that, you're not allowing them to have enough of a choice, you've had leakage of your suppliers, then you're not really addressing the issue. And why don't I think it's the only or rather that on its own, it's not addressing the issue. For example, there is a bit of how can I say, lack of flexibility, or a bit of stiffness, if you like, when you try to go to the regulator and try to say, like, changes, I have a new product, a new game variant I would like to bring to market. And, we're an industry, we say we're innovative, and definitely we are. If you think of live casino, like, it's a constant, it's popular and it's constant. And you want to be able to provide onshore at least what the offshore are providing at the same time. If there's something new on the market and it's available on offshore sites while you're still trying to get the okay from the regulators, it's a boat missed. So there's various reasons. I think if we want to, all of us putting our collaborative efforts together in improving the channeling rate in Sweden, then there's a number of pieces we should take together. And I like one key point that Gustaf mentioned, actually, and why, in my view, BOSS has done a great job so far, is collaboration. I always say it, at least on key items. It's really good to put our heads together as an industry. So when you go to the policymakers, we always tell them, like, we want evidence. You should have evidence with what you're unfolding there. But if all of us go with our own evidence or what we want, then, you end up with a shopping list in reality. And the policymakers have to sit there and go like, okay. And then that is where they end up picking and choosing. Whereas at least if on key items, an entity like BOSS is going with views of the key players on the market, you're going with an informed view and you're taken seriously in those discussions. I believe, Gustaf, I'm speaking on your behalf here, that if we as members help and feed you with good information, good arguments, and those arguments are put together, then in turn, when you're meeting with the regulators, they have one voice, but one informed voice. And I think that's really important ongoing, in my view. As I said, there's so much you can say.
Yeah, of course. But and now with the proposal, I suppose we have a frame in Sweden about how the licenses are going to be, who can apply for a license, who must have a license, and a frame of how this is going to be done. But the details are still to be worked out. We don't know how the application process will be made. And if you have a wish list for the government and also the gambling authority when they work out these details, what are your key points? What is your key wishes for the Swedish B2B licensing?
Well, if you're talking about exactly software providers, I mean, if you're looking at the entity per se and what you would want from an entity, many of us are licensed in multiple European jurisdictions, tried and tested, we hold licenses there. So, if we don't comply, you will know, it's headline news immediately. So I think you can take from what we've already met elsewhere. You don't need to replicate literally everything. And again, lessons to be learned, if you like, from other markets in Europe, which have recently introduced the supplier licensing unintentionally, I think, just because of how the requirements are put in, where the company is or where your server is, or whether you have the ISO certification, just none of those are wrong on their own, but they're sometimes put in a way where you end up in a market as one individual supplier having 5-6 licenses. And you're probably submitting the same documentation for each of those license applications, because maybe there is no flexibility to say, okay, we understand you have to supply all those. You're the regulator. We're not the ones who adopted the law ultimately. But some flexibility to not replicate even the documentation that you're providing. Sometimes you end up doing even that. So just on the corporate side of things, if you ask me a wish list, I'm like, you can keep it light touch. You don't have to make it cumbersome. Many of us are listed on the, whether it's a London Stock Exchange, we have many obligations that we show. And, again, you can go and check about our behavior and our licenses. It's, regulators talk amongst themselves. You don't need to replicate on the corporate front. And then other bits that you add, one key point is not to duplicate what you're doing if you want to add more to that license than just the corporate, because we've seen it across markets. Sometimes even for the regulatory authority, dare I say, they end up with receiving duplicate information from the operator and the supplier, and there's the same information more or less that you're receiving. Is that needed? At the end of the day, a regulatory authority has, I suppose, only so much resources. But if you're really then introducing that licensing system for suppliers, unless it ends up being just a paper exercise, which it shouldn't be, you have to have oversight of those. So we need resources for that proper oversight. And if you're asking us to submit, reports or what have you, then equally should be going through those reports. Otherwise, why are we submitting them? So, there's a lot that you can say, but a key wish list is like when we say keep it light touch, it's not just because we don't want to provide the information. We will provide it, but it's also about, there's got to be a reason of why you're doing those things. And, back to Sweden, of the reasons of why you felt there was a need for that policy intervention, which is quite a big policy intervention when you say, I'm introducing a B2B licensing system in a market that's not been open that long, really.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because in Sweden, and like both you and Gustaf have now said, that the reason for introducing this is mainly because you want to have a higher channelization to the Swedish market, and obviously if you want to have a supplier license, software license in Sweden, you cannot then also provide it to black operators. I know that it's extremely early stages in Denmark, but there is a rumor that Denmark is also putting B2B licensing in place. We don't yet know who will be covered by that. But their rationale is less of a channelization argument. It's more in order for B2B suppliers to take responsibility for their own compliance. How do you see that rationale?
Who do you ask?
What's that? What did you say, Gustaf?
Well, there may be, of course, different reasons why you impose B2B licenses. I'm just a local guy. Charmaine works all over the globe, so I assume she sees a lot of reasons for that. But I fully agree with that the Swedish context is to at least 99% focused on the miserable channelization situation in this jurisdiction, and that is the main reason to implement B2B licenses. Once again, I think it's important for us in the industry to emphasize that this is not the golden egg. It seems like some political stakeholders in my own jurisdiction believe that this will solve everything, and it simply will not do that.
I will start with what I said earlier, like why? I mean, we all say, look at the Danish market. Actually, we say it's a functioning market. We all use it as an example when we want to share experience elsewhere, especially in new markets outside of Europe. So we look to Denmark and we say, like, it's a market that functions, the regulations make sense, the regulator makes sense. Why do we, if I want to be provocative now, why do we want to risk unraveling what is functioning? I think, again, experience perhaps tells us that if you start, well, a rumor starts from somewhere, so it's going to go somewhere. But if you say, like, oh, we're talking about rumors about a B2B licensing, other things might pop up down the line if something goes, especially if it goes to Parliament. We're not the only ones who do our lobbying jobs. Many do their own lobbying jobs, and if they're doing a good job, you will find that in Parliament they'll end up with much more on their plate than what they bargained for, and you risk really unraveling a framework that is set out really well. And why do I think it is set out well? Because if you think about responsible gambling, the regulator has been able to come up and evaluate its guidelines and issue guidances. We've seen recently on certification, there's been consultations. So the regulator has leeway to do quite a bit, in my view. But if you go down the route of saying, oh, we want to introduce a B2B system because we want to shift, if you like, responsibility or more work onto the suppliers, that to me is not a good enough reason for you to risk unraveling something in the bigger picture. If, for instance, you say, like, oh, we feel that suppliers ought to be a bit more responsible on their game content, then I say, let's focus on that. It's happened in the UK. There's research, you're looking at safer by design, as we call it. You look at the games, which features may or may not be more problematic than others, or at least based on research and trialing, and you check those. And then you say, like, oh, let's look at certain features. In the UK, there was an exercise done a couple of years ago now, maybe 2 years ago. Ontario has followed suit. So there were benefits in that work done. And I say, let's look at that. If your issue is, advertising, then, as Gustaf has rightly said, as an industry, let's take stock and evaluate our behavior on the market. If your concern is player protection, these days, there's data and technology that allow you to look at the player more at the individual level and intervene early on accordingly. So, depending on what you would say the issue is, you can address it in a really constructive and efficient way. But just to introduce, in my view, a B2B licensing, just to say, like, oh, let's put more of it on the suppliers, to me, in a functioning market, is not enough reason. And in any event, even if you say, we want the suppliers to do the certification of games, for instance, there will still have to be an amount of responsibility on the operators for their own websites at the end of the day. So, you're shifting it, but you're probably just adding layers to the complexity. Then you're not really completely shifting it, in my view. And why do I say this about certification? Because, for instance, in Spain, I think a few years ago now, they actually reevaluated a bit how certain documentation was reaching the the regulator, because they realized that they were ending up with the same documentation submitted by operators and by suppliers. And now they found a way where, I'm not going to go into the complexity of it, but if you've submitted it once, you don't have to submit it twice, kind of thing. But they realized that they were ending up with quite a lot of work on their desk that was not needed if you've done it once already. So I think there are ways and means of how you can address certain issues without having to go outright down a route and saying, oh, B2B licensing is going to solve that issue. I don't think so. There are means that we could sit down around the table and you discuss with the regulator, like, what really is the issue over here, and let's find a way to do it. And one last point, again, if you think that the suppliers should be more responsible, you can get, for example, a B2B accreditation. That's something which we did with GamCare against the safer gambling standards, when you're held accountable for that. So again, there are so many possibilities that you can explore out there. And as we said, early on engagement, at least we would hope that you'd have that possibility to sit down with the regulators, with policymakers, and have that discussion for whatever reason they think that is the best policy intervention, that you can engage with them early on and share your views. I'm not the one who's going to go and tell the Danish politician this is how you have to do it. No, I can share with you based on my experience and others how it works and how it has not worked elsewhere and the complexities down the line.
Excellent, very interesting. Jari, obviously monopoly in Finland, but before we leave the B2B issues and maybe focus a little bit more on what's coming in the markets, what responsibility is put in Finland on B2B suppliers to make sure customers gamble on the locally licensed sites?
Nothing at the moment, but first a little bit background information. So in principle, we don't have any control for the B2B suppliers, but in practice, that's not the case when we are talking about Veikkaus, the monopoly operator, because Veikkaus needs approval for all new games, new tech from a regulator. And that has caused big challenges when Veikkaus has organized RFP processes, because they don't have any documentation from regulator before RFP processes, just afterwards. So we don't have any official guidelines for B2B suppliers at the moment. And at the same time, I would like to mention that when a regulator is controlling Veikkaus operations and their suppliers, but you should remember that something like 30% already market share is outside Veikkaus. And then when we are talking about digital channel, Veikkaus has less than 60% market share. So over 40% of operations are not controlled anyhow, anyway, by regulator. So actually, I would say that Veikkaus is suffering a lot of very tight regulation, but at the same time, there is open market. You can do almost whatever, and no one asks what you are doing, because our Finnish regulator doesn't regulate at all offshore operators. And black market operators, I call black market operators companies who are operating by Curaçao license or things like that. So no one even knows what kind of businesses and what kind of systems they are using.
Is Veikkaus able to put pressure on the suppliers they are using?
Yes, maybe Charmaine knows better, because you also are the supplier of Veikkaus, but unofficially, yes. But officially, I'm not sure what kind of tools they have, because as far as I know, there are nothing like that in the contracts between Veikkaus and suppliers. So, but of course, they can give some pressure that suppliers what Veikkaus are using are not allowed to have customers who are operating mainly in Nordic markets or whatever. But in practice, they are not doing so much.
Great. I would like to continue with you now, Jari, because I'm really interested to hear what you mentioned in the beginning about the developments in Finland. What can we expect from the Finnish government and in relation to the gambling market?
Yeah, so why I mentioned that is that now we have already new process going on. So as you probably know, that there has been a direct link between Veikkaus and beneficiaries. So Veikkaus revenue hasn't gone to state budget, but instead of that, there have been specific beneficiaries who have got the profit from Veikkaus. But now there has been a political working group preparing new legislation, and they gave their opinion some weeks ago, and it's based on the idea that the Finnish state will cut the link between Veikkaus profit and beneficiaries from the beginning of 2024. And I would say that one of the main reasons why we have keep the monopoly system here in Finland has been the pressure from beneficiaries, because they have had huge financial reason to do that. They have got the 1 billion euros every year from Veikkaus profit. So now when they won't have that reason anymore, what that has caused already, although it's not official decision yet, but anyhow, it seems to be 95% sure that that will happen in the next few months. So now we have already had a public debate where politicians from different parties have said that maybe we should analyze licensing-based system also. So that was really stupid when Finland prepared now current Lottery Act. They didn't even consider a license-based system. So now what I have heard, I have helped. When I don't mention the name of the parties, I could say that I have helped the 4 parties to understand the gambling business and gambling legislations in different countries. So they have asked my opinion, because there is no one neutral person than me who can help them, because they have used to ask opinions from Veikkaus, but now they have asked my help, and I have explained the system, what you have in Sweden or Denmark or now in Netherlands, what has happened there. So I believe that we will have a new preparation for gambling law quite soon. I'm a little skeptic that current government will do that, but we will have parliament election next year in April, and it doesn't matter which parties will win. I would make a bet that the new government will start that kind of preparation or analysis immediately. And as I already mentioned half year ago, when I was the last time talking in this kind of webinar, that I still believe that we might have a license-based system 26 or 27 in Finland. So that's what now I not only hope, but I believe that that will happen.
Wow. And will we see a trade organization similar to Gustaf's books in Finland soon?
Maybe not that kind of organization, but yes, we have already established our independent organization with few familiar names. So we will give more information about that after a few months, I believe. But let's see what direction we will go, because now, from my perspective, my personal perspective, it's important try to be neutral, at least for a while, because then we could give independent information to policymakers, and they need that. Because now they have understood that the Veikkaus has their own agenda and someone should give the facts.
Charmaine, if we look at a market like Finland, is it beneficial for you to have it regulated with, well, at least initially, maybe then a B2C licensing system, or does it not really matter to you?
Well, I think most markets today are looking towards ensuring they are properly regulated for the key objective reasons, which are more or less always similar. As an industry, I think we are all looking for whatever reasons now to be working more within regulated markets. We as Playtech certainly are committed and have enhanced our commitment to regulated markets, and that's where our revenue predominantly comes from. So at the end of the day, you want to be in a market that is regulated. Now, if Finland had to choose to go down a route, which is a licensing system, then my key point over there, and I'm happy to hear Jari actually voice it, is that there would be enough work done really early on before, you know, any policymakers run off with ideas, in fact finding the why and the what and the how you would do it, because you really need to nail that down properly, because if you don't get it right, then who's benefiting at the end of the day? Not us, because if we're investing in being in a regulated market, I want to be able to recoup my investment. I mean, that's key. The players want to have their choice on that market. The government wants to get its revenue. You know, it's the usual arguments. So I am not going to say I have a preference either or, but if if Finland chooses a certain model, then that model has got to work. If it had to opt to retain a monopoly system, it's got to be sure it's running it for the right reasons, to justifying those reasons. And then, of course, you have to make sure that, you know, those on the market are legally on the market, if you like. So there's a couple of reasons there, and it's not always as simple in practical terms as saying like, oh, we want to introduce whatever enforcement measures to keep out the offshore. You have to really justify that. And just perhaps I'll take the opportunity, one point that Jari said about Veikkaus and contracts with suppliers. I dare say that there's a fine line over there between what is the role of the lawmaker and the regulator, and the responsibility and the role, if you like, of the entity in sort of interpreting what the law is saying. So that's in terms of enforcement. But as I've said, if the authorities had to go down a route of wanting to explore a licensing model, then I'd really hope that there would be opportunities to engage in those discussions and share the views.
Perfect. We have a few more minutes. Gustaf, you have been pretty, like you said yourself, the new draft law was not too bad for the industry. What is your next task now? What are you looking to make sure Sweden does right next?
Regardless, we want to play an important role in the development of the details of that coming legislation. For example, the B2B licenses that we have been focusing on today. I can't stress enough what Charmaine said about the importance of that those licenses have a light touch, so to speak, because especially when the reason for implementing them is that you want to do something about a sour channelization issue. If you actually add a lot of administrative burden, they may be totally counter-effective, that the small and middle-sized B2B companies might come to the conclusion that they don't want to apply for such licenses. And in that case, the channelization will be even worse compared to the situation that we have today. So in the near future, we will we will focus a lot on the details in that coming legislation. And secondly, and perhaps even more importantly, we continue to remind legislators and regulators and other important stakeholders out there that all these repressive measures, because at the end of the day, a B2B license is also a repressive measure. You can send a penalty fee to a gaming supplier should the company not comply with Swedish law. All those repressive measures, yes, they play a role in a matured gambling market. But what's even more important, and apparently so difficult for political stakeholders to accept, is that the license holders, they must be given conditions for them to be able to attract customers in their own jurisdiction. What we saw in Sweden, and I see that all over the place, I see it in the Netherlands, for example, happening right now, is that political stakeholders, they tend to believe that when you re-regulate the market and you implement a licensing system, it's like an aquarium, and you can treat the license holders how harsh you want, and nothing could be more wrong. Actually, it starts with the licensing system, and you have to allow the license holders to have a beneficial relation with the customers, because it's so easy for the customer in Sweden or Finland or Netherlands or wherever to just choose unlicensed gambling. So that's the main message to the government and the parliament. Do not forget the conditions for the license holders. You may chase unlicensed operators and suppliers, all continue, it's fine, but it won't solve the problem unless you also care about the license holders.
And is that, can we tie that into what you said before about successful channelization? Is that the way forward?
Definitely. And we have proven in our country, Sweden, that we can maintain a high channelization. We did so in the beginning of the Swedish re-regulation. And a jurisdiction like Denmark and the UK, they have shown permanently, apparently, that you can reach a satisfactory level of channelization. And the secret in the sauce, once again, is actually not repressive measures. They play a role, but the secret in the sauce is the conditions for the license holders.
I really hope that we have both representatives from legislators in Norway and Finland listening to this, so they can take note and make sure that any future licensing system there is on the best conditions, both for the industry and then, of course, also in the end, the consumers. I think we are running out of time here, unfortunately. I would like to thank all the panelists for a fantastic session and for helping me or help answer my questions, and hopefully the audience as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, Gustaf, Jari, Charmaine. It has been once again a great catch-up about the Nordics. We do this for quite a few years now. So thank you so much for this session.